The stars outside the viewport were cold and distant, scattered across the blackness like a graveyard of suns. Captain Merrick Ryland stood with his arms folded, eyes fixed on the forward display of the Vindicator, flagship of Earth's last fleet. The war had dragged on for 5 bloody years, 5 years of losing ground, of human colonies razed, of surrender demanded at the tip of the Empire's blade. Now the Empire wanted humanity on its knees. Marek's lip curled at the memory of their envoy, a pale-skinned, long-faced noble from the Drathari High Court. The message had been simple: submit. Kneel before the Empire. Your worlds will be spared. Your people will serve, resist, and be extinguished. The Council on Earth had debated. The politicians had wrung their hands, called for compromise. But those who had seen the Empire's brand of mercy, entire populations culled, children taken as tribute, entire cultures erased, knew better. And for Marek, whose brother had been among the first massacred on New Leuten 4, there was nothing left to discuss. The door behind him hissed open. Commander Juno Varen stepped in, helmet under her arm, the gray of her combat suit still smeared with soot from the last engagement. "They hit Hyades Prime," she said flatly. "Orbital bombardment, civilians, no military targets." Her jaw tightened. "No survivors." Marek didn't move. His voice was ice. "And the Council?" "They're still debating terms." Bitterness twisted her tone. Of course they were. Marek had given up on the politicians long ago. "Ready the fleet," he said quietly. "All ships, full burn. We're taking this to them." Juno looked at him, eyes narrowing. "You mean—" "Yes," he said. "We're not defending anymore." His gaze remained fixed on the stars. "We're going to turn their worlds to ash." An hour later, the fleet moved. 82 ships, scarred and battle-worn, launched from high orbit over Europa Station. Carriers, dreadnoughts, fast attack cruisers, all that remained of humanity's spacefaring strength. No reinforcements were coming, no reserves left. This was it, the target, Drathar Prime, the heart of the Empire. It wasn't just vengeance, it was necessity. The war was lost if they didn't shatter the Empire's will now. There would be no future for humanity in chains. The crew of the Vindicator moved with grim purpose. No one asked about surrender. No one questioned orders. Everyone aboard had lost someone. A brother, a wife, a child. They were beyond hope now. What remained was resolve. As the fleet slipped into fold space, the stars stretched and vanished. Silence fell on the bridge. Marek stood alone at the command dais, a single line from the Empire's envoy replaying in his mind. "You humans are vermin. You will kneel, or you will burn." The irony was bitter. They emerged on the edge of the Drathar system 9 days later. The Imperial fleet was waiting. 200 warships, gleaming and unbroken, stretched across the void like a blade. A lesser man might have faltered at the sight. But Marek felt nothing except cold certainty. "Transmit fleet-wide," he ordered. Juno opened the channel. All ships, all crews listening. Marek's voice rang clear. "There will be no surrender, no quarter. We fight to the last, not for peace, but for memory, for the fallen, for our children to know we did not kneel." A grim chorus of acknowledgments followed. The first salvo came from the Empire. Plasma lances cut through the darkness, burning into the forward human lines. 3 ships disintegrated in moments. The Resolute, Blackthorn, Hale's Promise. The names echoed across the fleet comms, each loss searing deeper into the crew's resolve. And then humanity struck back. Nuclear-tipped torpedoes and kinetic slugs ripped into the Imperial formation. Drones swarmed, suicide vectors programmed to punch through shields and vent decks to space. Human ships burned and died. But so did Imperial warbirds, crumpling under the brutal efficiency of Earth's desperation-forged tactics. Marek's knuckles whitened on the command rail. The battle was chaos, fire and ruin, life snuffed out by the thousands each second. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. "Helm," Marek barked. "Punch us through their center. Get us in orbit. Target the planet." Juno turned. "You mean to fire on the surface?" He met her gaze. "They burned our worlds. They taught us this war. Now they'll see how humanity learns." The Vindicator and the surviving fleet drove through the thinning Imperial line. Ships wreathed in flame, hulls cracked and bleeding air. Still they pressed on. And then, there it was. Drathar Prime. A gleaming jewel of a world, lush continents, endless spires of alien civilization teeming with the blood of those who called humanity vermin. The order was simple. "All batteries," Marek said, voice flat. "Fire." The words had barely left Marek's lips before the gunnery crews responded. "All batteries. Fire." The Vindicator's massive spinal railguns charged with a low, ominous hum that resonated through the entire ship. Across the fleet, surviving dreadnoughts and cruisers locked their targeting arrays onto the planet below. Drathar Prime. The heart of the Empire. A world that had stood for 10,000 years, untouched, untouchable. It was here that the nobles had laughed as human colonies burned. Here they had watched the genocide of New Leuten IV. Here they had drunk toasts to the subjugation of Earth itself. Now it would burn. "First volley away," the gunnery officer reported, voice taut. On the forward display, streaks of brilliant white light plunged through the planet's upper atmosphere. Nuclear warheads, planet cracker kinetics, fuel-air superbombs designed for mass civilian eradication. Humanity had prepared for this day. Marek's gaze didn't waver. He felt no triumph, only a cold, hollow resolve. On one side of the bridge, Juno stood still, her jaw tight. She had ordered orbital strikes before, but never on a core world, never on this scale. No one had. "We're committed now," she said quietly. Marek nodded. "We were committed the moment they slaughtered Hyades Prime." The first impacts lit the planet like a second sun. From orbit, the devastation was surreal. Shockwaves rippled across continents. Whole cities vanished in blooming spheres of white-hot fire. The targeting systems fed back thermal and seismic readings, tectonic destabilization, atmospheric ignition, firestorms spanning thousands of kilometers. Civilian casualty estimates scrolled across the tactical display. 500 million. 600. Climbing. Marek forced himself to watch. He had sworn an oath never to forget the faces of New Leuten IV, the colony where his brother Jonah had died with a rifle in hand, defending a hopeless line against the Empire's massacre squads. Jonah's last message still lived in Marek's mind, raw and unbidden. "Don't kneel, Marek. No matter what they do, don't you fing kneel." Incoming comms burst. Imperial channels. Desperate. "Human commander, cease fire. Civilians are dying. There are children down there." Another burst. "Human fleet, stand down. You've proven your point. We seek parley." Marek's voice cut across the bridge. "Silence those transmissions." The comms officer hesitated, looking to Juno. "Do it," she said grimly. "We came here to end this." Outside, the battle still raged. Human ships died by the dozen as the Imperial fleet rallied. But they fought with diminished fury now. The spectacle of their world dying beneath them had cracked the enemy's resolve. "Multiple Imperial ships retreating," Juno reported. "They're pulling back to outer orbit." Marek's eyes narrowed. "Cowards! They'd have shown us no mercy." Another volley of planet busters fell, each one carving new scars into Drathar Prime. The planet's comm grid was breaking down, A rising storm of electromagnetic interference garbled the airwaves. And yet, under the numb weight of grim duty, Marek felt something stir in the pit of his stomach. A question. How far is too far? But it was too late to stop. "Sir," a sensor officer called, "we have visual. Orbital lifts. Civilian transports trying to break atmosphere." Marek crossed the deck in 2 strides. The display showed it clearly. Hundreds of refugee ships packed beyond capacity, clawing for orbit through the smoke and fire. Juno looked at him. "Orders?" The bridge was deathly silent. Marek's hands gripped the rail. His throat felt dry. Another memory flashed. The evac ships of Hyades Prime, shot down by Imperial cruisers. No mercy. No survivors. Now humanity stood in the same place. He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his voice was stone. "Fire on military craft, civilian vessels. Disable their drives. No survivors reaching Imperial space." A brutal compromise. Not clean. Not merciful. But not outright slaughter. Juno nodded slowly and relayed the orders. And so the slaughter continued. Human interceptor wings screamed down through the broken skies, hammering military gunships and crippling civilian vessels. Escape pods drifted, engines gutted, spiraling back into the burning atmosphere. By the hour mark, the planet's surface was barely visible through the storm of ash and fire. Continental plates had begun to buckle, oceans boiled, sending columns of steam into space. Night and day had ceased to matter below. "Casualty estimates?" Marek asked quietly. The sensor officer's voice was hoarse. 1.7 billion Tor, rising. Marek said nothing. It should have felt like victory. But standing on the command deck, watching the death of a world, Marek felt something else entirely. A weight pressing on his chest, heavier with each breath. Juno approached, her face drawn. Her voice was low enough only he could hear. "We're crossing lines here, Marek." He met her gaze. "There are no lines left, not anymore." But the words rang hollow in his own ears. Hours passed. By the time the last of the human fleet regrouped in high orbit, Drather Prime was a scarred husk. Atmosphere poisoned, cities gone, surface temperatures rising beyond survivability. No aid would come. No recovery was possible. Silence hung on the bridge. Finally, Juno broke it. "We've done it. The Empire's capital is gone." Marek nodded, though his throat was tight. "Signal the fleet. Withdraw. We're done here." As the battered ships turned from the ruin below, the fleet's comms were grim and hollow. There were no cheers, no songs, just weary voices calling damage reports, casualty lists, the names of ships lost. Victory. But at what cost? Hours later, in his quarters, Marek sat alone in the dim light. A single data crystal lay in his hand. Jonah's last message. He hadn't dared replay it during the battle. Now, with the ghosts of 1 billion dead pressing on his mind, he activated the recording. Jonah's familiar voice filled the air. "You know me, brother. Stubborn to the end. We won't make it out of this one. But don't you kneel, Marek. Don't you ever let them make you a slave. If they come for Earth, you burn them, brother. You burn them to the stars." Marek stared at the floor. "I did," he whispered. "God help me. I did." But there was no answer. Across the stars, word spread like wildfire. The Empire's seat of power, annihilated. Drather Prime, uninhabitable. 2 billion dead. In the Imperial border worlds, governors panicked. Some fled, some sued for peace, others howled for vengeance. But their fleets were in disarray, their pride broken. On Earth, the Council met in emergency session. Politicians shouting over one another about war crimes, about victory, about humanity's place among the stars now. But for the crews of the fleet, There was no celebration. Aboard the Vindicator, as it drifted in cold space, Marek stood again at the viewport. Juno approached, her voice subdued. "We did what we had to do." "Did we?" he asked softly. She looked at him for a long moment. "If we hadn't, it would have been us, our worlds, our children. They made this war." Marek nodded slowly, but the weight in his chest remained. No regrets, but no peace either. A new transmission arrived, from deep within the Empire, a surviving noble faction. "You've made your point, human. There will be no surrender. The war is not over." Marek's jaw tightened. His eyes burned with exhaustion and grim resolve. "Then we keep burning," he said coldly, "until there's nothing left to burn." The fleet drifted in the void for 3 long days, running silent. Repairs were underway, but the damage was deep. Of 82 ships that had jumped to Drather Prime, only 35 remained operational. Half of those had taken crippling hits. On board the Vindicator, the mood was grim, poisoned by exhaustion and by the silence that followed the slaughter. No victory speeches, no declarations of triumph, just the cold, empty weight of what had been done. Captain Marek Ryland barely slept. When he did, the dreams were worse than the waking hours. Firestorms across alien cities, children screaming, charred skies. The weight of 2 billion dead pressed into every breath. And now the war wasn't over. Not even close. The transmission had been clear enough. "You've made your point, human. There will be no surrender. The war is not over." A surviving noble house, somewhere deep in the Empire's fringe, had rallied what remained of the core fleets. Worse, they had begun calling on the outer vassal states, worlds that had long remained neutral, to join them in a holy war against humanity. In the Vindicator's war room, Marek leaned over a star map with Juno and the remaining fleet commanders. The holo display flickered, showing red markers where Imperial forces were consolidating. Worse, new signals now blinked on the fringe, outer colonies, minor alien species who'd once kept their distance, now pledging loyalty to the Empire's war cause. "We shook the hornet's nest," Juno said flatly. "And now the whole damn galaxy's watching." Marek rubbed his eyes. They were watching when they burned Hyades Prime. They were watching when they butchered New Leuten. Let them watch now. One of the other captains, Commander Halric, a grizzled veteran whose ship, the Ironclad, had barely survived the assault, spoke up. "We've bought a window, but it won't last. The outer worlds will rally faster than we can rebuild." "Which means we can't stop," Marek said quietly. "We finish this, or we're finished." But even among the surviving human commanders, cracks were starting to show. After the War Council broke up, Juno caught Marek alone in the observation deck. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the viewport, cold, distant, indifferent. "You can't drive them all to extinction, Marek," she said quietly. He didn't look at her. "Can't I?" She stepped closer. "We killed 2 billion people. That wasn't justice. That was revenge." He finally turned, eyes burning with fatigue and something darker beneath. "Justice?" he said softly. "There is no justice. Not anymore. Not after what they did to us. All that's left is survival." A long silence. Finally, Juno said, "You're bleeding the fleet dry. If we chase them into the fringe, we may not come back." Marek stared at the stars. "I'm not sure we deserve to." But it wasn't just the fleet fracturing. Back on Earth, news of the massacre spread faster than light. Footage leaked, orbital scans of Drather Prime's destruction, charred cities, broken atmospheres. The Council couldn't contain it. Across human colonies, the reactions were split. On the frontier worlds, those who'd lost everything, there were cheers. Calls for total war. Merchants renamed their ships Ashmaker, Avenger, No Mercy. But on the inner worlds, the core colonies, the mood was darker. Protests broke out on Europa Station. Half the council demanded inquiries into war crimes. Marek ignored them all. He hadn't fought this war for politicians. He fought for Jonah, for New Leuten, for every unburied dead left behind by the Empire's cruelty. But the Empire wasn't broken yet. 2 weeks after the Drather assault, the first counterstrikes hit. A human listening post on Epsilon Eridani, gone, slagged from orbit. Survivors, 0. Then a deep space convoy bound for Mars, ambushed by Imperial raiders. No distress signal, only wreckage, and worse, a new weapon. On the bridge of the Vindicator, the report came in. Juno handed Marek a datapad, face pale. Intercepted logs. The Imperials are using Reavers now. Marek frowned. I thought Reavers were just a myth. Juno's voice was grim. Not anymore. Reavers, cybernetic berserkers, genetically modified shock troops, used only when the Empire wanted to send a message. Tortured, enhanced, and unleashed without control, they didn't fight like soldiers. They butchered, ripped colonies apart from within. A grainy video played on the holoscreen. A mining colony on Proxima B screams. Blood. Metallic figures tearing civilians limb from limb. Marek's jaw tightened. How many colonies do we have exposed? Too many, Juno said. We never expected to fight this deep. We're stretched thin. There was no choice now. No room for mercy. Marek turned to his fleet commanders. We push forward. We hit their shipyards, their breeding worlds. Wherever they build those abominations, we burn it. Even Halric hesitated. We're barely patched up, Captain. If we go that deep, we may not come back. Marek's gaze was steel. Then we don't come back, but we make damn sure they don't either. Not everyone followed. 3 ships broke formation that night. Captains unwilling to follow Marek's path deeper into total war. They signaled back to Earth, asking for new orders. Marek didn't stop them. If they don't have the stomach for this, he told Juno, better they leave now. But the loss bit deep. Every ship mattered now. Every crew. The next target was chosen. A forge world on the Empire's outer rim, known as Velkaris. Velkaris wasn't just a military target. It was where the Empire bred its elite soldiers and constructed its new capital war machines. If humanity destroyed Velkaris, they could cripple the Empire's ability to retaliate. But there was a catch. Velkaris was shielded, ringed by asteroid defenses, and defended by a loyal vassal species, the Vorduan, brutal reptilian mercenaries who'd fought humanity before. As the fleet plotted its course, Juno cornered Marek one last time. You know what this is, she said. This isn't a war anymore. It's genocide. Marek looked at her, voice quiet but unyielding. They made it that way the moment they sent Reavers into our colonies. She shook her head. We've already crossed so many lines. His gaze didn't waver. There's no going back now, Juno. The only line left is survival. And so the battered fleet, running low on supplies, engines patched and scarred, set course for Velkaris. Every crewman knew the risk. They might not return, but no one flinched. Because after Drather Prime, after the Reavers, after the blood of 1 billion dead, none of them could kneel now. Not anymore. As the Vindicator entered fold space, Marek stood once more at the viewport, watching the stars stretch to infinity. He thought of Jonah's last message, thought of the billions lost on both sides, thought of the men and women now trusting him to lead them into hell. And for the first time since the war began, a single bitter question haunted his mind. What if we've already become the monsters we swore to fight? But there was no answer in the void. only the cold stars and the path ahead. The fleet emerged from fold space on the edge of the Velkaris system. No greetings, no warning shots. The void was dead and black, but every ship's sensors were screaming. Velkaris hung ahead, a blood-red world wrapped in storms and ringed with metal. Huge orbital stations bristled with railguns and plasma towers. Fields of asteroids encased in metallic armor drifted in a dense kill zone around the planet. And beyond those defenses, a swarm of ships, Vordun mercenary cruisers, faster and more vicious than any Imperial fleet Marek's crew had fought so far. The Empire had learned its lesson from Drather Prime. Now they would not defend with pride. They would defend with fury. Marek Ryland stood at the Vindicator's command rail, jaw tight, eyes locked on the tactical readouts. Every instinct screamed this was suicide. His fleet was half strength, crews exhausted, supplies low. And yet, this strike was necessary. Velkaris wasn't just a military target. It was the breeding pit for the Empire's elite shock troops, the Reavers, the cybernetic war beasts unleashed on humanity's outer colonies. The reports were clear. Velkaris produced thousands of them each cycle. If they didn't stop it here, Earth's own core worlds would be next. Juno stood at Marek's side, voice low. "This isn't like Drather," she warned. "They're ready for us this time. If we break the line, we'll be trapped in system." Marek nodded. "I know." She studied him. "And if we don't break the line?" He didn't answer, because there was no other path. The battle began at 0300 hours fleet time. It started with a wave of Vorduan fast attack craft, sleek, spike-shaped ships that swarmed the human fleet like wolves, darting through the void with brutal precision. Plasma lances tore through the ironclad's flank, splitting the old dreadnought open. Escape pods jettisoned into the blackness. Many didn't survive the withering crossfire. Marek gave no order to pull back. He couldn't. Not now. "All forward batteries," he barked. "Target the asteroid shield. We burn a corridor now." The Vindicator's main guns roared, launching tungsten slugs the size of transports into the armored asteroids. The fleet followed suit, hammering the ring with everything they had. One by one, the massive stones fractured and tumbled, opening narrow, fiery paths toward the planet. But the price was steep. Each opening drew heavier fire from the orbital stations. The Resolve, one of Marek's few surviving heavy cruisers, was gutted mid-transit. Its reactor detonated in a blinding flash, taking 3 Vorduan interceptors with it. Marek's knuckles whitened on the command rail. "We keep pushing," he growled. "All ships, follow the breach." By hour 3, the fleet had carved a bloody corridor toward Velkaris. Only 18 human ships remained functional. The Vorduan defenders showed no mercy. Boarding pods slammed into the hulls, disgorging hulking reptilian shock troops armed with plasma axes and grav sabers. On the Vindicator's lower decks, brutal close-quarters combat erupted. Marek himself led one of the defense squads, rifle in hand, pulse rounds cutting down the oncoming monsters in a haze of smoke and blood. One Vordun berserker breached the command deck's outer corridor, smashing a Marine's skull in with one swing before Marek dropped it with a full magazine of armor-piercing rounds. Blood steamed on the metal floor. Juno arrived moments later, visor cracked, left arm burned. "This is madness," she panted. "We'll lose everything here." Marek wiped blood from his visor, breath ragged. "Then we take them with us," he said coldly. Finally, after 6 brutal hours, the fleet broke into low orbit. Velkaris loomed below, an industrial hell world of forge cities, biofactories, and spires pumping thick toxins into a blood-red sky. Sensors confirmed. Multiple Reaver production sites below. Marek issued the order. "Prepare for planetary bombardment." But this time, something stopped him. On the targeting hollow, civilian structures showed up in dense clusters around the forge spires. Intel scans reported conscripted workers, tens of millions, many of them enslaved vassals from subjugated species. Non-combatants, collateral. Juno saw it, too. She stepped closer, voice rough. "This isn't Drathor, Merrick. We can hit the forges without leveling the cities." Merrick's jaw clenched. He remembered Jonah's words again. "Don't kneel, burn them, but after Drathor..." The screams still haunted him, and yet the tactical clock was ticking. Imperial reinforcements were already folding in from the next sector. If they hesitated now, they'd be trapped, surrounded, slaughtered. No room for hesitation, no room for mercy. Marek's voice was iron. "Primary batteries, target forges first. Secondary batteries, suppress surrounding defenses only. No wide area strikes." It was a compromise. A thin thread of humanity clung to in the void. The Vindicator's guns opened fire, joined by the battered remnants of the fleet. Railgun rounds and high-yield penetrators hammered the towering forges, collapsing entire spires into molten ruin. Shockwaves rippled across the scarred landscape. Reaver-birthing pits boiled under precision strikes. But the Vorduan defenders were fanatical. Even as the forges burned, new waves of enemy warships folded into orbit. The human fleet was outnumbered 5-1. Hull breaches rippled through Marek's surviving cruisers. The Storm Rider vented atmosphere and fell from orbit in a spiraling death plunge. On the Vindicator, secondary shields failed. "Core integrity at 40%, engineering reported. We won't last another wave." Marek's voice cut through the chaos. "Signal all remaining ships. Begin withdrawal. Now." Juno turned. "You're calling it?" "We crippled their production," Marek said flatly. "But if we stay, we die for nothing." She stared at him, but nodded. The battered remnants of humanity's fleet pulled out under heavy fire, weaving through the fractured asteroid ring, thrusters screaming. Half didn't make it. The Vindicator was the last to leave orbit. As Velkaris shrank behind them, burning, crippled but not destroyed, Merrick stood once more at the viewport. Another world scarred, another mission that felt more like damnation than victory. And the whispers were growing louder. In the days that followed, as the fleet limped through deep space, morale fractured further. Rumors spread, crew questioning Merrick's sanity, his refusal to annihilate Velkaris completely, others calling him weak, saying he'd gone soft after Drathor. In the mess halls, arguments turned to fists. Men who had once stood side by side now fought over whether this war should end in fire, or if there was still a line left to hold. Juno confronted him again, late in the observation deck. "You can't carry this alone," she said. "You're cracking." Merrick said nothing, staring into the cold stars. Finally, he spoke. "I thought after Drathor nothing could touch me again," he said hoarsely. "But when I saw those slave cities, I hesitated." Juno placed a hand on his shoulder. "Hesitation isn't weakness," she said. "It's what keeps us human." But Merrick wasn't sure anymore. Because out there, beyond the next fold space jump, the Empire was rallying. And Earth was still exposed. No room for peace, no room for doubt. The war would go on. And somewhere deep in Merrick's gut, beneath the exhaustion and the guilt, another whisper stirred. What if there's no line left to hold anymore? The fleet drifted in deep space, scars fresh from Velkaris. Of 82 ships that had once answered Merrick's call, only 12 now remained combat-capable. The rest were crippled, drifting hulks, or dust. Repairs dragged on, but the engineers were stretched thin. Supplies were critical. Medbays overflowed with wounded, and word was spreading fast. Imperial reinforcements had entered the neighboring sectors in force. Juno stood in Marek's quarters, arms folded, eyes hard. "We need to pull back," she said bluntly. The fleet's bleeding out. We need resupply. Regroup. Merrick didn't answer at first. His gaze was fixed on the holo display. News feeds from Earth, trickling in over fractured channels. Every report was worse than the last. Enemy forces sighted near Mars orbit. Imperial strike fleet detected near Jovian moons. Unknown weapon signatures inbound. Possible super-heavy platforms. And then, the worst of it, direct hit on Earth orbit. London Arcology Cluster, destroyed. Merrick's hands clenched into fists. London, he whispered. Juno's voice softened. We need to go back. It wasn't a choice anymore. Earth was under siege. Merrick strode onto the Vindicator's bridge. Signal the fleet, he ordered. All ships. Plot course for Sol. Best speed. The battered fleet jumped at once, wounded ships trailing sparks and venting plasma through fold space. No formation drills. No war chants. Just desperation. The jump took 17 hours. When the fleet emerged over the far edge of Sol system, the stars seemed colder than ever. And the signals coming from Earth were pure chaos. Emergency bands crackled. Multiple enemy signatures in Earth orbit. Repeat, enemy in Earth orbit. Arcology sectors 7, 9, and 12 hit. Ground-based planetary shields failing. Merrick's jaw tightened. Get us there, he growled. Full burn. They reached Earth orbit 2 hours later, and what Merrick saw made his blood run cold. The sky over Earth was burning. Dozens of Imperial ships, some larger than anything Merrick's fleet had seen, loomed in low orbit. Massive assault carriers disgorged waves of dropships and reaver pods. Entire swathes of the planet's surface burned. Cities in ruins, air thick with smoke. Earth's own orbital defenses were gutted. The old Jovian fleet had been caught in the first wave. Shattered. On the Vindicator's bridge, sensor officers shouted readings. Multiple enemy capital ships in orbit. We're outgunned. Planetary shields collapsed over major continents. Reaver pods landing across Eurasian and American sectors. Juno looked to Merrick. This is what they wanted, she said grimly. Payback for Drather, for Velkaris. Merrick's voice was ice. Then we give them hell. There was no time for complex tactics. Merrick ordered the fleet to punch straight into the enemy formation, a suicidal charge to buy Earth's surface defenders what little time they could. The battered human ships surged forward. Vindicator's main guns lit up, tearing into an enemy destroyer and sending it tumbling in flames. The Last Horizon, once a colony carrier, now a makeshift battle barge, rammed a Reaver mothership head-on, detonating its reactor in a blinding flash. But the losses were brutal. Enemy plasma batteries cut through the human formation like knives. One by one, Merrick's remaining ships fell. The Iron Spear, Defiant, Razorwind, gone. By the second hour, only 5 ships remained in the fight, and Earth's orbit was still swarming with enemy vessels. On the ground, it was worse. Reaver pods fell like a plague across the continents. Live feeds flickered on the holo, twisted cybernetic monsters tearing through human cities. Civilians slaughtered, arcologies breached, old military garrisons fought back, tanks, drones, infantry, but they were outmatched. The Reavers were designed for one thing: fear, and they were winning. Merrick watched the feeds in silence. This was the war he'd wanted to finish, and now it had come home. Burning Earth itself. Suddenly a new signal cut through the comm bands, a voice Merrick hadn't heard in months. Captain Ryland, this is Admiral Steele, Planetary Defense Command. We're holding as long as we can, but we can't stop them. We need a final strike, now. We need you to hit their orbital platforms. Juno turned. If we do that, we lose the fleet. Merrick's eyes burned. If we don't, he said softly, we lose Earth. There was no debate. Merrick ordered the remaining ships into a full frontal strike against the largest enemy carrier, a monstrous dreadnought parked above Eurasia. It was suicide. As Vindicator and her last companions surged forward, enemy batteries lit the void. The resolute blade was torn apart in seconds. The Vindicator herself took a crippling hit, decks venting to space, alarms wailing. On the bridge, smoke choked the air. Engineers shouted damage reports. Medics carried out the wounded. But Merrick stood firm. "All remaining guns," he growled. "Target that dreadnought. Everything we've got." The first volleys struck true, massive rail slugs punching into the enemy ship's core. But return fire hammered the Vindicator. Hull breaches ripped through the lower decks. The starboard engine went critical. Marek was thrown against the command rail as the ship bucked under the hits. Blood ran from a gash on his forehead. And still, he gave no retreat order. "Keep firing!" he roared. The Vindicator's final salvo, a full spread of plasma torpedoes, slammed into the enemy dreadnought's power core. The explosion was blinding. One of the Empire's biggest ships, gone, torn apart in fire. But the cost was total. The Vindicator was dying. Juno staggered to Merrick's side, her face streaked with soot and blood. "We have to abandon ship," she gasped. "The reactor's overloading." Merrick stared at the burning earth below. "Not yet," he said hoarsely. But there was no choice. The crew began evacuating, escape pods and shuttles launching into the chaos. Merrick remained on the bridge until the last moment, watching as the planet burned. Finally, Juno dragged him bodily to the last escape shuttle. They barely cleared the ship before the Vindicator erupted behind them, a funeral pyre in the void. The shuttle tumbled through debris, battered by shockwaves. When Merrick came to, the shuttle had crash-landed, somewhere on Earth's surface. Smoke choked the sky. Cities burned in the distance. Reavers prowled the ruins. Juno crouched nearby, rifle in hand. She looked down at Merrick, voice low. "Welcome home." And now the war had changed again. No longer battles in the stars. Now it was personal. Now it was survival, on burning soil, and Merrick Ryland, battered, broken, unbowed, rose to his feet, rifle in hand, eyes hard. "No more running," he said coldly, and Earth itself would become humanity's last battlefield. The sky was black with smoke. Ash drifted down like snow, coating broken streets, shattered arcology towers, and the twisted ruins of Earth's once proud cities. Captain Merrick Ryland staggered from the wrecked shuttle, rifle slung across his shoulder, blood drying on his face. His combat suit was torn, chest plate cracked. Every breath tasted of ash and burning metal. Juno Varen crouched nearby, scanning the horizon through cracked visor lenses. "Multiple reaver packs in the sector," she said grimly. "Survivors scattered. No clear command structure left." Merrick wiped blood from his mouth. He could still hear the final moments of the Vindicator, the ship tearing apart behind them, his crew screaming over comms. Most were dead. The rest, somewhere on this burning planet, hunted, and Earth itself was barely recognizable. Entire continents were ablaze. The Empire's orbital bombardment had shattered Earth's major cities. Only pockets of resistance remained, fighting block by block. The Council had fallen silent, government sectors obliterated. No orders, no chain of command. It was chaos. "Who's left?" Marek rasped. Juno pulled up a flickering holomap. "Scattered militia. Few marine companies from Europa. Civilians armed with scrap. Maybe a few council guards holed up in the old bunkers." She glanced up. "But Reavers own the streets now." Marek nodded grimly. "Then we take them back." By nightfall, they'd linked up with a survivor cell, a ragged band of Marines under Captain Rorden, dug in near the old Geneva district. The sight was grim. Battered men and women in blood-smeared armor, eyes hollow from days without sleep. Civilians armed with hunting rifles, makeshift bombs, anything they could salvage. Riordan met Merrick with a grim salute. "Didn't think anyone was still coming down from orbit," he said. "Didn't think we'd survive the landing," Merrick replied. His voice was flat, dead tired, but unbroken. Riordan led them through the ruins, a maze of collapsed arcology spires and burnt-out transports. "The Reavers hit us 3 nights ago," he said. "Tore through the outer districts. We've been holding the old tunnels, but we're losing ground." "How many?" Merrick asked. Riordan's face was pale. "Thousands, and they don't stop." Merrick's gut twisted. Velkaris had fallen, but not before producing a final batch of nightmares, and now those monsters were tearing Earth apart. That night, Merrick sat with Juno and Riordan in a makeshift command post. An old maglev tunnel half-collapsed, lit by scavenged lamps. Maps were spread out. Enemy movement tracked by drones and desperate runners. "Central Arcology Sector," Riordan said, pointing. "Empire's taken it, using it as a staging ground. Reaver pods drop there first, then fan out." He looked to Merrick. "We can't hold the city if they keep that sector." Merrick's eyes burned. "Then we take it back." Juno frowned. "With what?" "We've got a few squads and civilians with pop guns." Merrick stared at the map. "No choice," he said coldly. "If we don't cut their heart out, this city dies. The planet dies." It was madness, but madness was all they had left. At dawn, the assault began. Merrick led the first strike team, Marines and survivors moving through sewer tunnels beneath the arcology sector. Above them, Reaver howls echoed, metallic shrieks that chilled the blood. Juno moved at Merrick's side, pulse rifle ready. "You know this is suicide," she muttered. Merrick's voice was ice. "Better to die fighting than watching Earth burn." They breached the surface near a shattered mag rail station. Smoke choked the air. Fires burned across the horizon. Above, Empire dropships hovered, raining more Reavers onto the ruins. Merrick's team moved fast, through rubble-choked streets, across scorched plazas. Every block was a war zone. Reaver packs roamed like hunting beasts, twisted things of flesh and metal, moving on spiked limbs, eyes glowing red. The first clash came hard. Reavers burst from the ruins, 6 nightmare forms charging at Merrick's squad. Merrick opened fire, pulse rounds hammering into metal flesh. The Marines fought with savage desperation, grenades blasting limbs from bodies. But it was brutal. Private Keller was the first to fall, dragged screaming into the dark by 2 Reavers. Sergeant Diaz went next, torn in half before Merrick gunned the creatures down. And still they pushed on. Every meter gained was bought in blood. Finally, they reached the arcology core, a vast plaza littered with wreckage. Reaver birthing pods lay scattered, metal cysts oozing black fluids, spawning fresh horrors. Merrick didn't hesitate. "Demo charges, now," he barked. Juno and 2 Marines sprinted forward, planting explosives across the spawning pits. The timer ticked down. As the team fell back, the plaza erupted in a storm of fire, a chain of detonations ripping through the enemy heart. For a moment, just a moment, the Reaver tide faltered. And Merrick pressed the attack. By nightfall, the arcology sector was in flames. But the Empire's grip was broken. Marek's surviving forces, barely 20 strong, held the shattered ruins. Riordan's voice crackled over comms. "You did it," he said. "Sector's clear. We've got a chance now." But Merrick barely heard him. He stood amid the wreckage, rifle in hand, staring at the bodies. Half his squad gone. Earth's surface in ruins, and more Reaver pods falling even now. Later, back in the tunnels, Juno found him alone, sitting against a shattered bulkhead, staring at the floor. "You can't keep this up," she said quietly. Marek looked up, eyes hollow. "We're out of time," he said hoarsely. "Every hour more of those things drop. We kill 100, they send 1,000 more." Juno crouched beside him. "So what now?" Marek's voice was raw. "We hit the source." He unrolled a blood-stained datapad, intel from intercepted comms. Deep beneath the old capital arcology, a hidden Imperial node, a Reaver command nexus. If they could reach it, if they could destroy it, they might cripple the enemy swarm. But the route was suicide, miles of enemy-held ruins, dozens of Reaver packs between them and the target, and no backup. Juno stared at the plan. "You're insane." Marek's voice was steel. "We either end this, or Earth falls." And in the flickering gloom of the tunnels, Captain Marek Ryland rose, bloodied, broken, but unbowed. And the war, the real war, Sorstos, was just beginning. The tunnels beneath old Geneva ran deep, deeper than Marek Ryland had imagined. Twisting shafts, long-forgotten maintenance corridors, buried ruins of a pre-collapse Earth, all choked with dust, ash, and the stench of death. For 3 days, Marek's strike team pushed deeper, hunted at every turn. There were 12 of them left now. Juno, Captain Rorden, a handful of Marines, 2 hardened resistance fighters from the Geneva underground, all battered, all running on adrenaline and desperation. Their goal, the Reaver Command Nexus, the last hope of crippling the swarm. But the deeper they went, the more wrong it felt. Juno moved beside Marek through the dark, her voice low. "This place wasn't built by us," she whispered. Marek nodded grimly. "No," he said. "The Empire planned this years ago. The invasion was never meant to be orbital. It was always meant to end here." The team pressed on, through wrecked sublevels and half-collapsed passages. They found signs of battle everywhere, bodies of resistance fighters, torn apart, stripped of weapons. Signs of betrayal, human corpses executed, shot in the back, weapons gone. Someone had been here before them, and not all of them had fought for Earth. On the 3rd day, they found the first real proof. A shattered comms post, scattered datapads. Juno hacked the data feeds, what little was left. The recording was raw, grainy, voices arguing in the dark. "You're mad, cutting a deal with them. They promised us survival, Earth's lost. We have to—" Gunfire, screams. The feed cut to static. Marek's face hardened. "Traitors!" he growled. Rorden swore under his breath. "Some of the Council, they must have cut deals. That's why the Reavers are moving with intel." Juno looked at Marek. "If we run into them—" Marek's voice was ice. "They're no better than the Reavers." And still they pushed on. The deeper levels were worse. Here, the Empire had transformed the tunnels. Walls lined with black biomechanical growths, veins of pulsing metal and flesh. The very air throbbed with unnatural energy. The Reaver Nexus wasn't just a machine. It was alive. And it hated. That night, huddled in a half-collapsed maintenance room, Marek stared at the flickering map. One corridor remained, leading straight into the Nexus chamber. But scouts had reported heavy movement, Reaver packs massing, worse, human signatures with them. Traitors. Juno knelt beside him. "We don't have the numbers for a frontal fight." Marek looked up, eyes hollow, voice raw. "We don't fight fair." The next day, they moved. Fast, silent. Rorden led a flanking squad through collapsed utility shafts. Marek, Juno, and 5 Marines pushed the main corridor. It was a slaughter. The first ambush hit hard. Reavers dropping from the ceiling, slicing into the squad. Private Lane went down, throat torn out. Sergeant Voss, leg severed, bleeding out. Juno ended his suffering with a single round. And still Marek drove forward. Every step was blood. Then, the human traitors struck, a squad of black-armored figures or council guards. Their insignias burned off, faces masked. They opened fire, cutting down 2 more Marines. Marek returned fire without hesitation. 2 traitors fell, screaming. Juno flanked left, gunning down another. Marek moved like a man possessed, cold, methodical, merciless. Finally, 1 traitor remained, pinned behind wreckage. Marek stormed forward, rifle raised. The man ripped off his mask, bloodied, desperate. "You don't understand," he shouted. "They promised—" Marek shot him in the face. No mercy. When the smoke cleared, only 4 remained. Marek, Juno, Riordan, bloodied, one arm hanging useless. Private Hale, barely 19, eyes wide with terror. The final door loomed ahead, a massive biomechanical seal, pulsing with dark energy. Juno scanned it. "No turning back now," she whispered. Marek's voice was cold steel. "There never was." The door split open with a scream of tearing metal. The Nexus chamber beyond was vast, a cathedral of black and crimson, cables and veins running to a massive central core. The Reaver mind, the source. And it knew they were there. The air filled with an unearthly shriek, dozens of Reavers pouring from the walls. Marek's team formed a tight circle, rifles blazing. Hale went down first, dragged screaming into the dark. Riordan fought like a madman, firing with his one good arm until he was swarmed. Juno and Marek stood back to back, fighting to the last. "Plant the charges!" Marek shouted. Juno sprinted forward, slamming demo charges into the Nexus core. Marek held the line, pulse rifle overheating, barrel glowing red. A Reaver lunged. Marek's blade met it mid-air, severing its head in a spray of black ichor. Another slammed into him. He went down hard, pinned. Claws raked his armor, metal tearing. Pain lanced through him. Then, a sharp crack. Juno, sidearm in hand, shot the creature off him. She dragged Marek to his feet. "Charges armed!" she shouted. 10 seconds! They ran, sprinting through the burning chamber as the Nexus screamed behind them. The explosion was blinding. A shockwave hurled them down the corridor, walls collapsing in a rain of metal and flesh. Silence. Marek came to, half buried in rubble. Juno knelt beside him, bleeding, battered, but alive. The Nexus was gone. The swarm, crippled, for now. Outside, the Reaver howls faded, the city above falling eerily silent. They had won, for the moment. Marek staggered to his feet, leaning on Juno, eyes burning. "It's not over," he rasped. Juno nodded, voice hoarse. "It never will be." But Earth still stood, and so did they. 2 weeks passed. The skies over Earth were still dark. The Reaver Command Nexus was gone. Its destruction had crippled the swarm. Across the ruined cities, Reavers faltered and shut down, twitching wrecks littering streets and plazas. But the damage was done. Marek Ryland limped through the shattered remains of Geneva. The once glorious arcologies were blackened husks, entire districts flattened. Civilians, what few survived, huddled in ruins, burned, starving. Smoke choked the air. The sun barely pierced the haze. Juno moved beside him, her arm in a makeshift sling, face scarred, eyes hard. "They're gone," she said quietly. "For now." Marek said nothing. There were no words. Not after all this. The resistance had rallied what forces remained. Pockets of Marines, battered militia, survivors from the old council guard. But there was no government left. No council. Earth's leadership had burned with its cities. Across the system, faint signals trickled in. A handful of fleet ships had survived the orbital slaughter, crippled, scattered. One message burned through the static. "Captain Ryland, this is Admiral Steele. We've regrouped at Luna Base. Barely a dozen ships left. We need orders." Marek stared at the transmission for a long time. then sent a single reply. Rally. Prepare for counterstrike. Juno watched him, brow furrowed. You can't be serious, she said. Merrick's voice was rough. The Empire won't stop. We crippled them here, but they'll come again. She shook her head. We've got no fleet left, no command. Earth is barely breathing. Merrick's eyes burned. Then we fight with what's left. The next days were a blur. Merrick worked tirelessly, coordinating what little fleet strength remained, repairing ships, rallying survivors. The battered core of the Vindicator's crew returned from scattered escape pods, those who hadn't burned in the atmosphere. They came willingly. No orders needed. But the truth was brutal. Earth couldn't survive another assault. And the Empire still stood. Then came new intelligence. A runner ship limped into orbit, AI systems half-fried, hull scorched. On board, a captured data core from an Imperial warband. Juno cracked it. What they found chilled them both. The Empire's remaining core fleet had pulled back, reeling from the loss of Drather, Valkyries, and the failed Earth assault. But they weren't finished. They were building something. A new flagship, bigger than any dreadnought known. An extermination ship, designed for one purpose, to erase Earth completely. And it would be ready in less than a month. Merrick paced the bunker chamber, fists clenched. If that ship launches, he growled, we won't stop it, not with what we've got. Juno met his gaze. Then we hit it before it moves. The plan was madness, a last strike against the Empire's construction yards deep in the Karthus system. A black site, well defended, suicide. But it was the only way. The message went out, fleet-wide. Final operation, volunteers only, departure in 5 days. He expected maybe a handful of responses. Instead, nearly every surviving ship answered. The war wasn't over, and no one was kneeling now. The night before departure, Merrick stood alone on the bunker balcony. The city lay in ruins below. Fires still burned. The stars were dim. Juno found him there, silent, weary. You don't have to carry it all, she said softly. Merrick's voice was rough. I do. She stepped closer. You've given everything. He looked at her, eyes hollow. Not enough. Then, after a long silence, if we don't stop that ship, none of this will matter. She nodded. But if we die out there, Earth will need leaders, survivors. He said nothing. The next day, the fleet gathered. 11 ships, scarred, repaired with scrap. Crews weary but unbowed, the last of humanity's warriors. Merrick addressed them from the command deck of the Resolute Dawn, the new flagship, hastily assembled from what remained. His voice echoed fleet-wide. We started this war with nothing but blood and fire. We've burned worlds, we've lost our own. But we are not beaten. And we will not kneel. A grim cheer answered him. And then, the jump to Karthus. The battle was brutal. Empire defenses were fierce, layered with mines, plasma towers, interceptor wings. But the fleet drove in, wave after wave. Merrick led from the front. Every decision ruthless, every order precise. The extermination ship lay in dry dock, half complete, monstrous. The Resolute Dawn plunged through the defense grid, guns blazing. Merrick's final order, all ships, target the core, burn it. And they did. Torpedoes streaked through vacuum. Rail slugs shattered armored plating. The enemy flagship erupted, consumed in a chain reaction that tore through the yard. But the price was total. One by one, humanity's last ships fell. Juno's voice cut through the firestorm. Cores breached, target down, but we won't make it out. Merrick's voice was calm. We've done what we came for. As the Resolute Dawn burned around him, Merrick stood at the viewport. The Empire's superweapon was gone. Earth had one more chance. And in that final moment, surrounded by flame and wreckage, he smiled, not in triumph, not in peace, but in defiance, because they had not knelt, and never would. Epilogue, months later. Earth, still scarred, still rebuilding. Juno walked through the shattered halls of the old Geneva Command. A battered hollow statue stood at the entrance. Marek Ryland, rifle in hand, eyes burning with the fire of a man who would not break. Beneath the plaque, he did not kneel. Neither shall we. And the war, for now, was over. But the fight for humanity had just begun.